Hi, I'm here with Aaron Kinghorn, author of Hope, a guide to PMDD for partners and caregivers. Thank you so much, Aaron, for taking the time today to join us at Spotlight. Can you give us a quick intro?
Yes, my name's Aaron Kinghorn. As I said, the author of the book Hope, a guide to PMDD for partners and caregivers. I've been involved in the PMDD scene for a little bit because I've been married to my wife Jude for 21 years and she had PMDD. We have 4 kids together, and PMDD is something that we've really kind of worked together with, worked against, and worked around in so many different situations. Now I'm very much involved in providing peer support for partners and caregivers. So we have monthly Zoom sessions via the International Association of Premenstrual Disorders, to which I'm on the board of directors as well. And so I'm involved with that. I'm involved with a small research group as well, and we just had a research paper published pretty much today, actually. So that's out on social media, and that looks at relationships and quality of life for those who have PMDD and their partners as well. It's published in the journal PLOS ONE. So I wear a few different hats, but I'm actually a dentist as well. That's who I am and what I do.
Oh, thank you so much for the introduction. Can you share just a little bit more about your personal journey? I'm especially interested in the start of it and when you realized that what your wife had wasn't just the regular PMS.
Yeah, it's funny because I'd been to dental school for 5 years and I'd had modules on psychiatry, on psychology, on pharmacology, on physiology. My wife had done 4 years at nursing, and neither one of us really understood the context of even PMS. This concept was just foreign to us, which is crazy. I mean, how can you have 7, 8 years worth of medical education between us and not really understand that concept? I think it just highlights the gulf in knowledge, really, and the training that's going on. Both of us had a really low awareness. And I think that's really important to know. With myself and Jude, I mean, Jude is absolutely amazing. She is the most incredible person I have ever known in so many ways. She's intelligent, she's funny, she's the opposite of me sometimes as well, and it just works. So we got together in 2004, and even early on, I knew that there was some real ups and downs. She was at Leeds Uni, I was at Newcastle Uni. Even if we'd meet or we're on the phone and that kind of thing, it would just, I just knew that there's some ups and downs. And then when we were married and living together, I think I really began to notice that there was some really, really significant ups and downs. And it was confusing at that stage as well, really confusing. As I said, I don't really have much of a basis of knowledge in mental health or had direct experience growing up. And so I just know that sometimes she'd be really cheery, really hopeful, really optimistic. And other times she'd be really depressed, really overcome with fatigue, unable to get out of bed. She'd have some dark thoughts and some hopelessness. And she would blame herself. There's a secondary impact of, feelings of worthlessness. But there'd also be some extreme irritability, rage and anger. And we would argue a lot. Our world, the rules of the world kept changing over and over again. It was really difficult to know what I should be doing or how I should be reacting, or did I need to get some help or what have you. So it was really difficult in those early stages. In 2007, my wife was watching Loose Women on TV. I don't know if you've come across that show before.
Yeah.
And it's classic daytime TV. Some women sitting around a studio and they're just having a chat, covering different subjects. And that was when the topic of mood changes prior to the period was introduced to my wife. And so she said, "Hey, Aaron, what do you think about this?" And I'm like, "Oh, what?" And so I remember us having a brief chat about it. And then I think she went out and I was home alone. So I kind of went on the internet, because back then as well, there wasn't really much on the internet at all. There was no IAPMD, this is 2007, but there was the academic journals, which you go on and search. And so I spent some time on PubMed and I started reading about late luteal phase disorder, about PMDD, about severe PMS. And it was a real light bulb moment. I started to see that this was fitting together. I had really strong suspicions at that point, because in my head, I had already gone through some different things, but none of it seemed to quite fit. And then we started tracking, and it was like, oh, I felt like Neo in the Matrix, understanding the Matrix. That's how I describe it, because everything started to come together, and I could see things the way things are. Because when we were tracking, it was just so like clockwork. Within a few hours of the period arriving, Jude would kind of return to a lot better state. It was really quite defined, and I know it varies for individuals to what their symptom profile is, and when they experience the symptoms. We know it's generally between ovulation and when the period arrives. But for my wife, it was straight away at ovulation, symptoms would start, and it was within an hour or two of the period arriving. And so from there, Jude went through lots of different treatments, culminating in surgery in 2017. The surgery was the hysterectomy and oophorectomy, so everything. So yeah, so that's really the journey. And it's always interesting when people ask my journey, and it's kind of my journey is her journey, and I'd like to think that her journey I play a big part of as well. So yeah, it's been quite a journey and quite a roller coaster, I'd say. But where we are now is in a much better place.
Yeah, it's really good to hear, and how beautiful. It was really heartwarming to hear you describe your wife. You can really feel the love that you have for her. So that's really nice. In your book, you mentioned quite a lot about how people with PMDD tend to display quite confrontational behavior. They deliberately provoke you or push you away. Can you explain a little bit about why that happens and how to avoid taking it personally or reacting with anger back?
Yeah, it's really difficult because some of the behaviors you see with PMDD are the complete opposite of the fundamental principles that those people with PMDD have. I think trying to explain that to other people is really difficult sometimes because it can be so polar opposite. I mean, just to say as well, like, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a counselor, I've written a book, it's from the experience that I've had, but also, drawing on the experience of hundreds of different partners that I've come into contact with. What I'm sharing is my opinion on things. When you're talking about why that happens, I guess fundamentally I don't know. The way I process it and the way I kind of understand it is that, and there's an example in the book that I use of an analogy. If I was to try and recreate what it would be like for me to have PMDD, and I give this analogy of that I'm on a flight to a funeral. It's a really stressful situation. I lose my job. When we land, I've lost my car keys and everything like that. And then I drop my sandwich, at the end. And it's all that kind of like, it's all the build-up. It's all the kind of really, really, awful situation that has a massive effect. I haven't eaten, I haven't slept, I'm in a stressful environment, and then I drop the sandwich and it just all falls apart. Life isn't worth living, and that's won't even cover what it's like to have PMDD. It won't even touch it, but it's an analogy that I had to kind of try and help myself understand that. And I think for those who experience PMDD, because it's so overwhelming, because it's so all-encompassing, that it's so hard for that individual who has PMDD to really just be able to exist and cope with those symptoms and with the overwhelming nature of it, that there isn't much space for other people. What I've experienced in terms of grief before, when I've been trying to process grief, it's enough for me to try and process that grief without perhaps worrying about the person next to me. So I think there's an element of that. I think there is also an element of protection. It feels so shameful and difficult to bear that the person experiencing PMDD might want to kind of keep people out, And if you want to keep people out, one way is to kind of put up some really firm walls. But there's part of me that says, even that, I'm not even sure how. I think there's a lot of things that we could probably go through and discuss about why that happens. But I think there is something going on at a deep physiological or psychological level about partners. I think we occupy a special place in the brain. And I think it may be that because we already have that emotional vulnerability or intimacy with someone, it's almost like a compliment in some ways that we're trusted and loved. So we see the raw aspects of this more than other people. Sometimes I feel like partners look at that and say, well, how can you be like this when no one's around? and then if someone calls to the door, it changes. I really see that there is an amazing amount of masking that has to go on with PMDD, and those who have PMDD have had to put on that happy face for so many different situations, but it's only sustainable for a little bit before the whole physiological burden just becomes overwhelming. Those emotions and those feelings are going to come out at some point. It's just a matter of when. You did ask the second part of the question, was it how to avoid taking it personally? Yeah. I think being able to separate out symptoms and character traits is a really kind of important thing. And that was kind of a lot easier for me because my wife is just really cool. I think that difference was really quite marked. From an outsider's perspective, watching PMDD as almost like a spectator, I don't think many people realize how marked that change is. Separating it out is really helpful, but also just getting space. Sometimes it's just not productive to try and engage and fight this out or anything like that. If things are escalating, I think the best thing is just both people take some space and try and take the emotional heat out of it. Once you've had practice of seeing this happen over and over again, you see it for what it is. You understand that it's going to happen. You see the stages and recognize the patterns of behavior, and you're like, okay, this is what it is. I can move on for this. I'm not saying that that's easy at all. I'm saying it's just there is an increased capacity to cope with it. I feel like I wasn't the only one learning along this journey. Jude was as well. There would be a lot more insight and introspection as time went on. Jude could recognize it's an incredibly complex and bizarre thing, and even then Jude talked, even before she had a surgery, she'd talk about how she would be experiencing PMDD, know it was PMDD, and it was almost like watching it happen. I think she had as much control as she possibly could have had prior to the surgery, but even then, it's just so incredibly difficult. Sometimes you just can't think your way out of something.
Thank you for that answer. It was very elaborate. In your book, you also mentioned making contingency plans and writing things out in the first 2 weeks of the cycle, like together, have kind of plan of action. Okay, when it hits, what do we do? What do you need from me? What do I need from you? This kind of thing that could possibly prevent some major blowouts or meltdowns. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think, and this happens a lot of the partner support groups, that people come in and be like, how do I cope with the luteal phase? How do I cope with the storms? How do I cope with the really intense parts? Actually, my belief is that the most progress happens in the follicular phase, where people are able to talk one with another, where they're able to kind of, in a better space, to plan for things and to really make some palpable differences to their lives in anticipation. Myself and Jude, we'd have a shared Google Calendar when we'd anticipate the luteal phase would come in. And so we'd have a look in the diary and be like, oh, we've got that barbecue or something like that. And we're like, okay, let's plan around that, come up with a plan, see how you feel. And it's almost kind of like, if you are able to calibrate expectations prior, it really helps adapt in those situations and helps to avoid intense pressures that can induce difficult scenarios. Those organic discussions, those one-to-ones where you're both talking in a reflective way, are the real sources of healing in the PMDD relationship, where both have that safety to talk about it. I really do try to promote doing that, but it's difficult, isn't it? Because really, when the times are good, that's the times you don't want to revisit difficult areas.
Yeah, but it's worth it, isn't it?
I think so.
Yeah. Adjacent to that, I mean, you're also human. You also have things going on in your life, maybe issues, challenges you're running into. How do you cope with your own mental health and look after your own mental well-being while supporting someone through PMDD?
This is a challenging one for me to answer for two reasons. One is because I didn't really look after it the way that I did. I didn't really reach out to anyone. I just dealt with this in a true kind of man thing, which was kind of like, right, I'm just going to do this. That's useful to a certain extent, but it's also meant that, post-surgery. I think I've had a lot to process and work through. Me and Jude still talk about PMDD all the time. And certainly during the book, we discuss different aspects and different things. And so there's a lot of Jude's voice in that book as well, I think. From that perspective, I wish I'd done more. I wish I'd talked to people, but that's always difficult because, there is confidentiality issues. And obviously in a relationship, some things do, between you guys. But I think I could have reached out to a professional as well. All the usual mainstays, exercise, all those things probably helped me. Exercise in particular. I love surfing. That really helped me. But also my kids as well. My kids were a source of additional work and stress, but they were also very special to me. There's nothing quite like the unconditional love of a child. So I think the second reason is I'm naturally resilient. It's not something I've worked or gained through experience. It's always been the case. I think we all get different bodies and different minds and able to deal with things in different ways. So I think it's difficult for me from that perspective. I definitely wish I'd reached out and done a bit more self-care during that time. I might have been a better partner because my capacity to engage in a caregiving role would probably be increased.
So you'd say if that support group had been around that you're now leading, but for you as a community member, that would have been really helpful.
Oh, definitely. Well, I've been doing the group for 5 years, and I remember it was the first time I'd ever spoken to another person who was a partner of someone with PMDD. It was quite emotional, actually, because it was the first time I'd ever spoken, despite all those years, of experiencing this, to speak to someone else. And what's amazing is everyone thinks that their experience is unique, and it is unique. But there is so much commonality, so much crossover, and so much similarity. When partners attend the group, it's a really special experience and very validating. And I certainly felt validated, and it was nice to speak with someone. I wish I'd had that opportunity while there. That's part of the reason why I do it, because I recognize that there is a need there. There is an absolute need. There's a survey I did that looked at the impact of PMDD on partners, and it is significant. We do need to build that in the equation. Now, obviously, there's a balancing act, and I don't think anyone's advocating that the needs of the partners need to be above. But I think it's just saying that this isn't a competitive space for care. We all need the space to improve. We all need to have more support systems. The study that was published yesterday looks at the quality of life and quality of relationships. I really encourage people to have a look at the paper or look at some of the summaries on there, because I think it's the first paper that actually has any quantitative data on both quality of life and quality of relationship for both partners and those who have PMDD. We found that pretty much, for the partners, they did express feelings of high stress, diminished sense of personal growth and worth. They had difficulties within their caregiving, but they also had a general sense of feeling of unsupported, because quite often they do act as a caregiver as well. But what was really nice about the results of the study is that both partners and those who have PMDD, on the aspects of love and commitment, remained absolutely unaffected by PMDD. It was consistent with the control groups who didn't have PMDD. Love and commitment just remained there. And I think that's the story of hope, isn't it? And those are the things that we have a little bit more control of, the direction that we want to head in and where we want to go. So yeah, kind of nice on there. I like that a little bit. But yeah, it's open access as well, that study, so you can look it up.
Perfect. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, that's a really hopeful message. That's really nice. And of course, that is also the main reason why the partners stay. I mean, otherwise we would have been long gone. The thing is, I want to ask a question that's maybe not so nice, since a lot of the PMDD fueled behaviors is aggression, is anger, it's also gaslighting, because PMDD gaslights both the person who has it and the partner. How do you distinguish between PMDD behavior and real emotional abuse? Because that is such a fine line, and partners also should be able to recognize the difference and protect themselves.
Yeah. So we talk about a fine line between kind of PMDD fueled behavior and abuse, and I feel like sometimes there isn't a line. Actually, there are some situations where there is abuse and it can possibly be fueled by the PMDD. I'm not saying that, PMDD makes anyone abusive, certainly doesn't. PMDD can be extreme enough to cause people to self-harm, and 34% of those with PMDD will attempt suicide. So it clearly has a massive impact on some behaviors that are self-destructive. I think it was in the initial survey I did in 2021 of almost 100 partners, about 45% had experienced some physical abuse at some point. I think it's really difficult to talk about, and certainly in the book, it was the last chapter I wrote because I don't feel very qualified to talk about it. It's a difficult one to really talk about. So I think that it's really important, though, that this is discussed more. I know you've chatted with Shalene, and I think she does a great job in her book. Of all the material that I've seen or read, I think hers is the most sensitive and honest about what that experience can be like. So I'd really point people to her book for that. Abuse is something that we need to talk about more in the community. I speculate that it's bilateral, that those who have PMD are more likely to be abused as well. But again, we don't know. There's no research on this. We just don't know from an academic point of view. We just have hints and suspicions from the discussions I've had with partners. I've seen many who do experience different forms of abuse. So how can you tell the difference? Well, it doesn't really matter where the abuse is coming from. Abuse is abuse. If someone's experiencing abuse, they need to take appropriate action. It's quite easy for physical abuse, isn't it? Because, it's quite a nice line, in that sense, that that's illegal and should be an absolute hard red line, that if that's happening, then that needs to change. And it's not a sustainable situation. If there's a risk to harm to someone, they don't need to be there. But the aspects of kind of emotional or verbal abuse are a little bit more, pervasive. And you might have seen some of the social media groups or forums where someone with PMDD or a partner will post on there and say, look, this is what happened. And it might be a really minor thing. He said this or she said that. And it's actually something that you might find in any relationship, something that's been clumsily said. And then you go in the comments section and it's like, that's a red flag, just leave them. And it always polarizes into that, doesn't it? It's like, oh, just get out of there. It's abuse, It's really difficult because there is that degree of subjectivity. But I think what partners can do is become informed. There are some really good resources online for looking up about support. There's even checklists and things that can help. A partner should know when they need to get help, in the same way that if someone has PMDD and they're being abused or they are being abusive, they know that they need to get help. And there's been partners who've spoke about how actually when there's been an incident in the past, it's actually been a really helpful scenario because it helped recognize just how much of a need there was for treatment or for something to change. I think that anyone who feels that their safety is compromised or that their world is narrowing in, then they need to get some help. They need to get some help for sure. And that's generally what we'll try and signpost people to do when there's that kind of scenario. So yeah, a tricky subject for sure.
Thank you so much. And I think you highlighted something important as well, to recognize that point where you need external support, and even just talking to someone, not necessarily someone qualified, but support groups or just even a close one who will understand, I think already is a big step and already can be a massive help.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we all try to, and I think I did to a certain extent, just try to crack on with what we're doing. But there are people out there who are qualified, people who have experienced these kind of scenarios. And I think getting help is really necessary. If we have a broken arm, we're straight to accident and emergency. We're straight to the hospital. But mental health is different, and it shouldn't be. If we are experiencing some harmful aspects or things that are really affecting us severely in our functionality and day-to-day life due to mental health, then regardless of what the condition is, regardless of who we are, we need to get the help that we need. So I think we need to treat our psychological aspects the same way we do our physiological aspects. But we've got a long way to go with that and the way society views that, and particularly with PMD, because it is menstruation, eating, mental health, 2 stigmas in one, the double whammy. So there's plenty of work to do.
Mm-hmm. And I really like the section in your book where you talked about PMDD like an alternate reality, like in the movie Inception. You talked about creating totem to help keep you grounded. How can partners do that, and what other simple strategies or little rituals would you recommend to stay emotionally regulated during those difficult periods?
I think for me, with my totem, I know who Jude was. I know the values that she held. I knew the principles to which she wanted to live her life. I knew that she loved me. So when these things were happening, I could look past the behaviors and see the person. And also, I think the more I understood about PMDD, the more it increased the compassion. That was a really big totem for me, fundamentally. But also, as well, as time went on, it helped me develop a sense of my own self and who I was. And so my totem became who I was, who I developed, and what I stood for. I guess sometimes it takes some sort of opposition to help firm up who you are. And I think PMDD helped do that for both of us, help really solidify who we are. Sometimes I'll talk about there's 2 journeys. There's the individual journey of understanding who we are. And for those who have PMDD, it's understanding how PMDD affects them, almost like that third entity in the relationship. And then there's the kind of medical journey with treatment. And those 2 are really important. You can't have one without the other. If you ignore the medical side of things, I don't think that's very healthy at all, from what I've seen from some of the partners where their partner might be in denial of PMDD or not engaging with treatment. But then if you ignore that personal journey of introspection and reflection and how you're developing, that's not going to go well either. It's got to be this combined approach. I know that there's some partners who've had photo books that they've had to look at when things are really, and that's their totem, something very physical like that. I've known some who will have a letter from their partner to read, which I think is a nice idea. It's funny you mentioned the word rituals. I've had a partner who, with their partner, after some sort of a flare up and things had got pretty tight and they perhaps might have had an argument or something like that, they would do this ritual, and I can't remember what it was. It was something like they have to touch each other's noses at the same time or something like that. And I just thought this was hilarious, but actually just a really nice thing to do, because you both need to be in that place to be able to do that. That was a bit more of a healing ritual than it was a totem. But I think the totem can be different things for different people. People will find what works for them. But it's like a lighthouse to me. When you're in the sea, losing direction or it's dark, you've got a fixed point to really point to and say, right, these are some truths that I know are the foundation of my relationship. So yeah. So I think those are some of the things that people can do to help keep the vision when times do get hard, which inevitably they do.
There's some really nice practical ideas for some partners that might be just starting out on their PMDD journey. One more that I want to mention that I talked to Shalene about was humour. So she said funny, angry gifts of like an angry toddler or something like that to her partner to take the sting out of it a little bit. I really like that one as well.
But the way I'd always know that the luteal phase would start, if I hadn't looked in the calendar or I wasn't tracking, was that my jokes wouldn't be funny anymore. That was the first sign that they just don't land the same. And I'm like, oh, okay, right. The dynamics shifted here. We've had a massive laugh about some of the aspects of our experiences or different things that have happened. Humor helps us to cope, and it's a social lubricant, isn't it? It really does just help. It really just does help with all kind of interactions. So I'm a big advocate for being an absolute stupid man at times and saying silly things, sometimes misplaced, but sometimes not.
Nice. I think that concludes our chat. I really enjoyed talking to you. Thank you so much again for taking the time to talk about your journey, share your experiences, give some advice, and talk about the book as well. And while we're on it, definitely check out the book called Hope by Aaron.
Thank you so much. Can I just give a last plug for the National Association of Premenstrual Disorders on there? It was a really special moment when me and Jude came across them on the internet, because they were the first organisation. We were like, look, there's other people like us and they've banded together. We need an organisation that provides good evidence-based advice. And I know Sandy, who's run the organisation for ages, does an amazing job at trying to keep this going. Thanks so much for having me on. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Thanks, Aaron.